Well, I'm really excited that we have some time today for our first topic, which is what it takes to boss well. I have a lot of conversations about this with folks, and specifically about the skills and tools that we have to focus on developing to be more effective leaders. And let me kind of take a minute to tell you how I got here. So this summer, I did something that a lot of families did once COVID wiped out vacations and travel. We had our summer vacation to the beach planned, and we had been looking forward to it for a long time, and we ended up canceling it.
Yeah.
And staying home and staying safe, and that was the right thing for us to do. And so we took that money and we bought a pool. We put a little above-ground pool in our little backyard because our little backyard would only take a little pool. I have 3 kids. Their current ages are 10, 8, and 4, and they're all water babies. They love being in the water. And so my wife and I said, you know what? This is a long-term thing for us, right? We want our kids to feel comfortable inviting their friends over, and if they're going to be hanging out with friends, summer after summer, we'd rather them be at our house and know everybody than have them being out there wherever they might be. So it was a very fast conversation. We knew that everybody is getting a pool, so we need to do it now. We ordered our pool on May 13th, and it was installed on July 2nd.
Wow.
And I think the people who ordered their pool just a week or two later, because of how much demand there was, since so many folks were staying home, their pools went up in October. So it was the demand was incredible. Anyway, so I had read a little bit about what to expect when it came to caring and maintaining a pool. My expectations, the picture I had in my head and what turned out to be reality were vastly different. And I had a little bit of a period of irritation. So the pool goes up. The pool goes up, and we filled it. And then you have to take a little water sample to the pool store, and they tell you what you need to put in it so that you can swim in it, right? Okay. Because you got to change it from tap water to pool water. That's apparently a thing. That makes me sound like I really know what I'm doing with a pool. I got to change it from tap water to pool water. Now, that's just what the guy at the store told me. Hey, we got to change your
magician.
Yeah, tap water to pool water. Anyway, I took a 25-minute class at the front counter of the pool store when the guy was going through everything I needed to do. He was like, first, we got to do your pool opening. And he handed me this 2-sided laminated sheet that had 12 steps on it.
Wow.
And then I had to spend a lot of money on all the stuff that you put in. And then when he finished all of that, he was like, okay, now let's talk about your weekly maintenance. I felt like I needed a nap at that point. Then he went into the weekly maintenance, and there were 5 things I need to do every week. Now, some people just throw a chlorine tablet in the pool and that's that. But that's not apparently the thing to do anymore. It's a little bit more involved depending on what kind of pool treatment system you've got in place. Anyway, I came home and I was a little bit irritated because this was clearly going to take some time every week. And I was willing to devote the time that it took to have a nice pool and to maintain that pool. But the amount of time that I thought it was going to take versus the amount of time that it was actually going to take, there was a gap. Right? And I was a little bit irritated.
Yeah.
And then I just, the next day or a day or two later, I kind of woke up and thought to myself, yeah, but you know what? This is what it takes. I'm sorry, Joe, that the picture you had in your mind, the expectations you have of what it was going to take to maintain a pool didn't work out. Right? That the amount of time and effort you thought you were going to have to set aside to make it work is probably now going to be 3 times as much. But look how lucky you are. You've got a beautiful home, beautiful family. You got a backyard. You're in a position to give your kids a pool that they can swim in. That's an extraordinary thing. You're so lucky. Put your big boy pants on, suck it up, and be prepared to spend this amount of time every week on maintaining your pool and be grateful that you can. It's what it takes.
Wow.
And it got me thinking about this is a conversation sometimes that we need to have with bosses, right? There are a number of things that bosses have to do and do well in order to be great bosses. There are a number of things that bosses have to do and do well in order to create the conditions for people to thrive, in order to get to meet the psychological needs that people have. And most folks underestimate how much effort and how much time it takes to both do those things and get good at those things, and to have a healthy environment that people can swim in, to finish my metaphor.
Wow. A beautiful one it was.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you don't mind me splashing around in that.
Too far. Too far.
The puns will never stop.
I love about that, though, Joe, is so many things, but one of the things is that this gap that you describe of between the expectations that you had and the reality of what it actually takes, right? I think that that is applicable pretty much on a daily right now, right? Is you think you know the rules, you think you know what you got to do to get through another day, but then the rules change and the reality is you have to change again. And now your expectations have to change again. Your expectations of yourself, your expectations of those folks that you serve as the leader, right? What I am interested in is what is in that gap other than like frustration. What exists in that gap? And this is what I work through a lot with folks in coaching, is being in that, noticing, right? What is in that gap? Because I think that's where the opportunity is, right? Would you agree that that gap between the expectations and then the reality, that's where the juicy stuff is?
Yeah. And can I go through the process mentally of acknowledging that maybe my expectations of what this was going to be or what it was going to take weren't accurate, and if I want to be even moderately successful at it, what am I going to have to do in order to rise to the occasion, right? So in that gap, the first thing that my mind kind of went to with your question was sacrifice. Right? If my expectations are different than what the circumstances require, I now need to give something up in order to meet the moment, right? So let's just play the numbers game, right? If I thought I could spend 2 hours a week maintaining my pool, but it's really 4 hours a week maintaining my pool, I've got to give up something to find those other 2 hours. And if we use the analogy with leaders, what were you hoping the job was going to be versus what it actually takes? What do you now need to sacrifice? Is it the certain amount of time in your office doing certain things? Is it a certain amount of safety, right? If we know that one of the things that leaders have to bring to the table if they're going to be successful is vulnerability. And that is so hard. That is unsafe. It's uncomfortable. And so the sacrifice then becomes comfort. Right? That sacrifice of comfort lives in that gap. The sacrifice of time lives in that gap. The sacrifice of the routine that I thought I was going to get to have as a leader lives in that gap. And it's only when I'm willing and ready to accept that I'm going to sacrifice my picture of what was and how it was going to be for what I need to do in order to be successful and to be good at this. It's only when we accept that we have to make that sacrifice that we can then, okay, I'm going to say it, that we boss better. I'm going to go on. I'm going to stay on brand.
That was so on message, but deeper than all of that too is exactly what you said. That's so powerful. The vulnerability, the sacrifice. It is this noble pursuit of boss, right? And the reality of that sacrifice and that vulnerability that is required. You know, I think one of the understandings that I've come to as I've matured, hopefully, is that this thought pattern of naming what is in that gap, Is it vulnerability? Is it sacrifice? All of that stuff, that's important. You can't just gloss over and go,
Mm-hmm.
I'm resilient and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to just go from here's the expectations and here's the reality. And oh, look at me leap. I can just go. No,
Mm-hmm.
a boss hero sits in the gap, is vulnerable in the gap, and says, all right, how am I going to use this opportunity? How am I going to grow with this opportunity? Grow in that gap.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was writing my first book, I was interviewing a lot of different kinds of leaders, and I always asked them a question: what's your job? If you had to give it to me in a sentence, what would you say? And the most common answer was the phrase, I put fires out every day. And I think there are a lot of people who will hear that and identify with it, and they take pride in it, right? I am the person that gets called on to deal with the crap when the crap comes. Or I'm the person that has the answers. I have the experience. I know how to put that fire out. And you know what? I am there from the moment that fire sparks. And all of those, they are worthy of celebrating. But there is a certain amount of predictability and comfort that comes with being the person who puts the fires out every day. And I think people sit in that gap and don't evolve because they think there are too many fires. I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the capacity or the space or the opportunity in my job to go beyond fire putter outer as a manager. To think about in a more intentional way, what do my people need from me as a leader, from the culture we have here in our workplace, from the environment that we create? What do they need to be even more successful, more effective, more satisfied, more fulfilled? And how do I give that to them? That requires some sacrifice. It requires sacrificing a little bit of the pride that comes with being the fire putter outer, too.
Yeah. What's at stake for those leaders, bosses that are really, really uncomfortable in the uncomfortable? What if they don't want to sit there? What's at stake, Joe?
Well, talent leaves when work becomes less fulfilling, interesting, when they don't feel valued, when there is an opportunity, when there isn't a compelling reason to put forth effort. And so when we stay put, things become routine. We miss and misunderstand what's important to people. And so we risk stagnation, both in our environment, our effectiveness, and in our personnel.
That's big.
Huge.
In order to boss better, you got to live in the gap. You got to sit in the uncomfortable. You got to be vulnerable, and you got to grow in the gap.
But there's also some skills, right? Just some straight up things that people need to learn how to do better. Like we can have this big picture conversation about vulnerability and living in the gap, but like you also got to know how to run a meeting.
Okay.
How do you get a lot of stuff done in a 30-minute meeting when how do you get 10 things done in a meeting when you only got time for 5? Like that's a skill, and that requires some work. What do you think are some of the other just straight up skills that make for better bosses?
Well, obviously, I think one of the key tenets for me is this kind of connection or at least a communication of the kind of connection that you're trying to foster with your team, right? Is to be able to authentically to yourself make it meaningful for you. And hopefully that translates to making it meaningful for them, and thus their commitment to stay evolves. But that communication, that desire for connection. So that I think that's a very tactical thing in terms of how do you communicate your desire to have connection with that employee?
Well, we could take the first part of that sentence and put a period on it too, right? You know, we could say, how do you communicate? Full stop. Period. End of sentence, right? Communication is a skill. Learning how to share ideas, instructions, disseminate information. And we still need to do the other half of your sentence, right? How do you communicate who you are and what you're about and be your authentic self so that you're not showing up and trying to be something that you're not, because that lack of authenticity is just going to turn people off, and they're never going to follow you. They're never going to believe that you have their best interest at heart. But there are dozens and dozens of other kinds of communication too that I think leaders have to get good at. So just the skill of learning, how do I get out of here? If you're watching us on YouTube, I'm pointing to my head. To here, I'm pointing to my mouth. You know, how do I get my beliefs and ideas and wants and needs? How do I understand and flex my communication style and communication skill in order to be effective? So I'm with you on that. I think it can be bigger and broader.
Absolutely. And you know, this is why we're the yin and the yang together, is because you went, okay, communication, hard stop there, period. And I went, but the care and the connection and the ooey gooey, ishy, squishy gray, that's me. That's what I want to talk about.
Alyssa likes to live in the ether of the big, what do we call it? The hippy dippy baloney. It's not baloney at all. Of course not.
The hippy dippy fog and mist. It envelops me like a nice warm blanket.
Alyssa's here to talk about feelings, and I'm here to talk about tactics. And that, folks, is why we're the I feel like the Odd Couple music should start playing right at this moment. One of us gets to be Felix. I'm completely dating myself a little bit with that reference, too, because there are folks listening to this who have no idea what I mean by the Odd Couple. Right?
Joe is old. Really, really old.
Except that I'm not. I just watched a lot of Nick at Night back in the day, right?
Well, one of the highest compliments I feel like I've ever been given is that I have an old soul.
Mm.
And so I think you're an old soul as well.
Well, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, let me say this final piece about the whole what it takes to boss well, because I do think that there is one skill that transcends them all.
Ooh,
I actually call it the transcendent leadership skill. And it's not going to come as any surprise to you as our resident professional coach, but there is no doubt in my mind that it is the skill of coaching. Right? It is learning that there's a difference between feedback and coaching. There's a difference between mentor and coach. There's a difference between performance management and coaching, right? For those folks who are new to the idea of coaching, we hear the word coach and we think about the baseball coach, the guy with the whistle around his neck who teaches people how to get good at something and then encourage them and cheers them on and you could do it and fight harder. And in the workplace, that's not what we mean by coaching. Coaching is asking the right questions in the right order to create some self-actualization, right? Coaching isn't about giving answers. It's about guiding the person across from you on a path or journey. I'm going to use some of your big ether words. A journey to figuring out those answers themselves. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I'm not trying to mansplain coaching to our resident professional coach. I'm defining it for our listeners. But when you think about that as a skill, is it the transcendent leadership skill? Is it the great differentiator, Alyssa?
I would like to think so. I would like to think that, that what I get to do in the world is really meaningful and has more applications than folks might believe it to right now. Coaching is an immensely powerful tool. And I think that it absolutely can transcend, transform, all the buzzy, nice words that we want to use with it. But at its core, it is exactly that. It is powerful. And so when we're talking about bridging the gap, boy, that's a powerful tool to go through that gap with. Yeah.
Well, folks, we want to know what you think. I'm on Instagram at JoeMull77. Also, be sure to like our Boss Better Now podcast page on Facebook, where you can leave comments, ask questions, suggest ideas for the show, and more. So tell us what you think. What are the skills that it takes to boss well? What lives in that gap? How do you get from where you are to where you want to be as a leader? We want to hear that from you. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't say this now. Our ability to keep doing these shows, it actually depends on you. We need you to rate the show, leave a review, subscribe to the podcast, and help us grow our audience. Thank you for helping spread the word and grow your show.